And next, we'd like to also invite the CEO of Asia Investor Group on Climate Change, Ms. Rebecca McCullough-Wright. 好，我们邀请贵宾也可以稍微帮我们的识别证翻正，或是我们先收起来都可以。好，接着呢，我们欢迎 Please welcome Professor of Graduate School of Agricultural and Life Sciences of the University of Tokyo, Professor Ryo Kosaka, to the stage. Welcome. 好，继续邀请到台上的是国泰人寿林昭廷总经理，有请总经理。接着欢迎国泰世华银行邓崇仪总经理，欢迎。欢迎国泰证券庄顺玉董事长。欢迎国泰产险陈万祥总经理，有请。接着欢迎国泰证券周冠成总经理。好，接着邀请安侯永续发展顾问公司黄振中董事总经理，欢迎。And next, I'd like to invite Executive Director of Climate Action of AVPN, Mr. Aravindan Srinivasan, to the stage. Welcome. 接着邀请国泰投信郑立成资深副总。以及国泰金控资深顾问陈淑芬 Sophia Welcome。好，我们有请以上贵宾来到舞台上，我们先请工作人员检查一下，也请摄影师看一下画面。欢迎资深顾问，我们请工作人员引导。好，是否所有的贵宾都露出脸庞，看向正前方了呢？好，为了光线好看，我们稍微将下巴往下一点点。好，看向正前方 for our first picture. Please look in the camera and give us a bright smile. 1, 2, 3. Another one. 1, 2, 3. 好，我们第二张一样竖起拇指比个赞，好吗 ？Please give us a thumb up. A Taiwanese style picture. 永续创新，韧性发展 ，Better together， 共创更好。我们看向前方。1, 2, 3. Smile. 我们是否捕捉到精彩画面了呢？OK， 我们现场来宾请热烈掌声，感谢今天所有贵宾的共襄盛举，各位可以先行回座了。Thank you so much to our distinguished guests. Please mind your step and use the stairs in the front to return to your seats. 我们右前方有一个阶梯可以使用，请各位小心步伐回座。我们稍后也将正式的展开我们今天的精彩议程。Thank you once again to all our distinguished guests for joining us in this summit, and we're now about to begin our summit agenda. 当全球面临着地缘政治、极端气候、生物多样性流失以及社会不平等的风险升高，永续发展已经不再只是一个长期愿景，而是企业当下必须立刻回应的核心课题了。因此，我们接下来就即将展开今天的第一场专题演讲，邀请到的是台湾证券交易所的林修明董事长带来演讲。我们是不是掌声欢迎林董事长 ？Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Chairman of Taiwan Stock Exchange, Mr. Sherman Lin, for his speech. 董事长将会以台湾创新版探索永续创新的资本市场途径为题带来演讲，欢迎。
好今天副主委还有今天 CK， 还有蔡副董事长还有我们次长还有今天所有的贵宾媒体先进大家早安。
早。
首先，我仅代表台湾证券交易所呢。来参加这个活动。我想最重要的，在我的演讲之前，我想今天是台湾国泰金控第10届的这样的一个对于永续跟气候变迁的相关的论坛的举行。那台湾证券交易所非常荣幸能够跟国泰金控 co-host 这样的一个 event。那刚才 CK 也提到国泰金控的价值，特别是在环境、永续变迁、气候等等的落实。所以今天我在我演讲之前，我仅代表台湾证券交易所，也代表台湾的整个资本市场，对于国泰金控长期不只是对于相关的议题的宣导，甚至于执行落实，致上最高的谢意跟敬意。我们认为国泰金控在这方面的琢磨跟耕耘，足为让我们各个公司作为一个表率。我想刚才也提到 CK 也提到，对于相关的这个这个气候变迁的议题 事实上在全世界，特别刚才举个例子，欧洲更实体的发生。所以事实上我们在日常生活里面真正的感受到，那这个工作这个挑战基本上是全球一致的这样的议题。那特别是这一次的论坛的主题呢，基本上来讲的话，是所谓的我们以创新跟永续的主轴来谈论相关的议题。所以今天我想最重要的，我来这里跟大家来做一个报告，就是说我们怎么样借由永续跟创新来资本市场，我们怎么看待它？台湾证券交易所怎么针对这相关的这样的一个议题，我们怎么来执行？所以今天我大致上会看到，我会有4个主题来跟大家做报告。第一个，台湾资本市场，我们现在各位很清楚，我们在全球，因为我们的产业的发展，那我们有全球的地位，跟我们在产业上资本市场怎么跟产业的发展结合。第2个部分来讲，我们讲到了台湾真正的科技的优势，再加上我们这个治理的韧性，如何我们不只有台积电的一个护国神山，如何创造群山这个观念。最后我跟大家报告 TIV 创这个创新版如何担负起这样的一个责任。最后我想也跟大家报告，赖总统最近也在提到亚洲纳斯达克这样子的一个实践的资本跟创新的永续的发展。那我想各位都很清楚，我们特别是这几年来台湾的整个的资本市场都是呈现稳定的发展。我想最重要的是我们有非常强大的所谓的半导体跟 AI 的供应链，所以也让我们整个台湾，特别是今年因为 AI 的这样子的，大家对于 AI 的整个的 infrastructure 的一个建设，让我们的产业真的让世界看见了。所以我们可以看到我们的整个上市的市值跟我们的日成交量呢，从去年我们的日成交量事实上来讲的话，只到4160亿，是今年我们很快的，我们已经将近到了1兆的成交量。我们的市值的表现，在全世界来讲的话，我们现在是第5名。我们跟印度事实上伯仲之间，互有领先。但是我们最重要的还有我们的本益比、我们的股价净值跟我们的周转率。各位可以看到，台湾在全世界的资本市场，我们展现出了强大的韧性。那在这个部分来讲的话，我想这一页也让大家跟大家报告，台湾的资本市场在跟我们的产业的结合之间，如何支援我们产业的发展。我们从1960年传统产业的这样的一个奠基，我们看到了一些民生的需求的产业，包括水泥、食品、纺织等等，或者是跟一些相关的当时的一些环境里面，台湾的资本市场 support 他们的发展。最重要的是到1980年到1990年代的时候，因为西竹科学园区的这样子一个设立，让台湾慢慢的作为未来的科技岛，慢慢的奠下了一个基本好的基础。那在这里我们特别也提到，就是说看到都说1995年我们证交所首推科技事业的这样的一个制度，特别是专注在我们科技事业的发展。那在这个科技事业的发展里面呢，我们也不会是以盈利获利为最重要的一个上市的一个标准。我们企图是让我们的 IPO、我们的资金能够尽早的进入到我们的一个产业的发展的一个旅程里面。那这个科技事业的上市机制，事实上跟大家报告，包括我们的那时候的联发科MediaTek， 它也是从科技事业这样子的管道进到我们市场来。 像我们也看到，现在它已经是全台湾40第2、第3的这样子的一个上市公司。那接着我们也看到了，我们在2000年到现在以后，我们看到我们全球的整个电子的供应链我们的产生了，包括富士康、包括 TSMC 等等，我们慢慢的资本市场架构了，提供了重要的资源给我们这些公司。那这些公司在这20几年来，我们也经过，包括我们可以知道富士康也好，或者是鸿海科技集团，或者是我们MediaTek 等等的公司，他们刚进入到这个市场的时候，它可能只是个连接器的一个公司，但是各位，一个创新怎样的转型，他们现在变成一个世界级的公司，包括 IC Design 等等，所以这个也是资本市场怎么样去提供充沛的资金来协助这样子的一个创新的转型的一个很重要的管道。到现在我们的 AI 核心的枢纽，所以我们刚刚也除了这个以外呢，我们可以看到台湾现在最重要的，除了我们名列前茅的市值以外呢，我们的外资的持股将近50%，所以跟大家报告，我们这样的亮丽的成绩单，也事实上来讲的话，不只是国内的投资者对于跟大家产业的整个发展并行，国外的投资者也非常看重台湾整个的产业的发展。那这样子的一个胃纳量跟高估值的认同呢，因为有透明的治理跟稳健的体制呢，我们有充沛的资金，所以最重要的跟这个我们有完整的产业供应链，我刚才提到的半导体跟 AI 等等呢，我们创造了全球非常重要的群聚的这样子的圈子。我们有别于韩国的整个资本市场，我们台湾的供应链是傲视全球，这个是一个产业聚落的强项。台湾代表了不是看到的是富国神山 TSMC， 我们看到的是一群大家台湾 team 所打下的产业的基础。那我们现在从我们台湾证券交易所的整个市值来看的话，我们将近有80% 是来自科技业。那我们在治理方面来讲的话，事实上我们也敢在我们金管会跟政企局的长官的指导之下，我们对于我们的公司治理，我们事实上也得到很多国际性的机构的这样子的一个很高的评价，所以也间接的也直接的对于我们的这个台湾的市值有更大的推进。那第二个部分来跟各位谈的就是科技的这样子的一个发展。我刚才提到台湾，我们不只是一个80% 的这样的一个驱动这样的关键的角色以外呢，我们希望这样如何孕育多元化的一个韧性，让我们产生一个群山的效应。我跟大家也报告，台湾最强的，事实上大家看到台湾的基本上是一个供应链的形成。台湾这么小的一个区域里面，我们在台北、在新北市、在桃园、新竹，甚至现在慢慢到台中、到高雄，基本上台湾在这么小的地方里面，我们有完整的供应链，这个也是非常重要的。现在我们在跟台美之间的合作，各位也看到，我们也从供应链的角度让大家知道，全世界知道，台湾强的事实上是一个产业的供应链。那我们如何打造护国群山们，这是我们非常重要的一个使命。那我跟大家报告，那总统也提到，我们如何趁现在的这样子一个优势的情况下，我们如何让我们的台湾变成一个科技岛跟资本岛的结合，这个是一个非常重要的一个加成的作用。那我们在这里也跟大家报告，我们希望 TIV 的核心的引擎是借由我们现在的基础里面呢，往未来的方向、未来的产业去居住。所以我们跟 包括我们的 ecosystem 里面的承销商、会计师、律师，或者是我们的一些创新的集团里面呢，我们共同的一起引领，我们借由台湾现有的产业的基础的供应链里面呢，我们如何让我们的未来的发展怎么样结合在一起？这个就是我们希望发展资本市场的力量。那在这个部分来讲的话，我们 TIV 的部分也希望借由我们对于永续的 DNA， 成为永续价值的创造者，我们看到我们提供的是一个陪跑的角度，而不只是一个资金供应的角度。我们包括我们希望有更多的法说会对我们的 TIV 创的这样的一个公司，我们也希望我们跟台经院跟我们的资策会来合作，我们也希望做我们相关的新兴的产业的一些报告，让更多的投资者，让国外的投资者看到，让他们看到我们台湾创新的这样的力量。借由我们的碳交所，我们也实行如何让我们这些公司能够具备永续发展的 DNA。所以创新跟永续两个全国际的普世的价值，是真正吸引国际资本的力量跟国内资本的力量。我们借有这样的一个力量的支持以后，让台湾创造更多国际型的企业。最后，我想跟大家报告，这个就是我们刚才提到的，就是说，我们希望在现有的基础之下呢，借由资本，我们能够带动创新，让我们不只是未来的 AI 10大建设相关的我们的重要的产业能够发展以外呢，在这个历史的时刻里面，我们更希望借由我们的资本市场，能够吸引更多的国际的注目、国际的资金，借由创新跟永续整体的这样子的一个力量，让台湾借由这个资本市场能够驱动产业，让产业实际的吸引做产业的永续的发展。各位，我想这个 journey 需要在座的各位大家一起来创造。台湾证券交易所是一个平台，我们执行我们金管会跟我们国家重要的产业的政策，跟我们的资本市场的政策，创新、永续。我再一次提到，这个是一个普世的价值。我们不只需要有新创的产业，我们也希望现有在我们的资本市场的产业里面，必须皆有创新的元素产生。我们更要有永续的 DNA。这个部分来讲的话，对于企业的发展，对于台湾未来产业的发展，是一个重中之重、非常重要的目标。所以，我也利用这个机会，也希望跟国泰金控，借由国泰金控在我们台湾的一切影响力，我们一起携手，如何将创新跟永续的元素落实执行到我们整个一些 ecosystem 的伙伴们。台湾是靠打群体战的，台湾 team 我们台湾的精神一直都是靠大家一起，在我们的一些未来的一些发展实力上，我们借由这样两个关键因素里面，会创造出台湾的各个百工百业具有国际竞争力，借由资本的局促里面，创造另外一个台湾新的力量。最后，我再一次感谢国泰金控举办这样的一个论坛的活动。今天的论坛的主题的活动也会相当的精彩。我们也祝福今天的整个论坛能够圆满顺利。大家也藉由这样的论坛，给予我们资本市场更多的意见。我相信大家，我们是台湾队，我们大家一起针对的相关的议题，一起往前走。再次感谢大家今天的时间，谢谢大家。
谢谢，我们掌声感谢林董事长精彩的演讲。请董事长小心步伐，先行回座，我们的前方有阶梯。好的。 在全球供应链重组、能源转型加速，还有近邻治理持续深化的时代当中，台湾企业正面临着新的竞争门槛。不过同时呢，也看见了绿色成长的新契机。那如何透过政策的引导、产业的创新，还有金融支持，来共同建构具韧性的绿色转型战略呢？接下来各位来宾，我们很荣幸邀请到经济部何敬仓政务次长莅临现场，我们是不是掌声有请次长带来分享？欢迎。Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Deputy Minister of Economic Affairs, Mr. 金仓和。我们有请次长带来分享，欢迎。
国泰金控蔡副董事长，还有李总经理，我们秀媛副主委以及我们现场所有的贵宾，各位媒体朋友们，大家早安。那接着由我来分享这个主题哈。那刚刚林董事长也提到台湾这个在证券交易市场所有上市柜股票的这个实力哈。那这个其实台湾的整个经济的表现全世界有目共睹哈。那所以这个也代表台湾的产业在全球扮演一个非常重要的一个角色哈。那我们今天谈这个主题啊，如果产业的这个角色没有把整个气候变迁的议题把它思考进来的话，那其实我觉得我们过度发展经济的一个结果，会造成整个全球这个资源或者是环境的一个浩劫哈那所以台湾的半导体产业其实大家都在努力，怎么样能够让晶片更省电，让晶片能够更节能，其实这是我们对全球应该要做出的一个努力跟贡献哈。所以今年我们看环境部已经收取碳费了哈，这个碳费最大笔的收入应该来自于半导体部门所以半导体部门为大家做节能减碳，应该是有他们的一个产业的一个责任哈。所以这个也是我们台湾未来在全球的这个竞争力上面哈，除了我们在研发上的一个投入以外，我们能不能打造一个绿色永续的一个商品？这个是我们在绿色韧性上面很重要的一个挑战。那所以我今天的简报大概就会分这3个部分来跟大家做一些分享。那时间很有限，我大概也只能点到为止哈。那所以大家都很了解，现在从这个外部环境的一个发展跟挑战哈，其实对全球对台湾来讲，每天我们都是在面对这样的一个时代的考验哈。那所以从这几天上个礼拜这个短延时这个强降雨哈，造成南部跟北部的这个灾情大家可以看得到现在的气候变迁不是只有嘴巴说说而已它是很残酷的在你的眼前这个实现出来，让你看到这个老天爷对我们的一个提醒其实我们现在面临的是一个全球是一个地球村的一个时代那每一个地球公民的角色，其实我们都不能自绝于身外了所以我们是跟全球是联动在一起的所以台湾更有责任来做好很多在产业发展过程里面，我们必须要兼顾社会跟这个永续环境的永续的议题其实这些都要做很多平衡性的这个发展，这也是现在目前政府施政的一个挑战那台湾经济的表现，从去年到现在为止，其实都让世界刮目相看从去年的8.76% 的经济成长率创15年新高，到今年的第一季，其实有将近15%的这个经济成长率那今年的这个经济成长预测主计总处是预估可以达到9.64那许多国际的机构也都给台湾经济的成长很高的一个评价。那台湾的整个经济的一个表现，在出口在 GDP， 在这个全球经济体的一个排名上面都有很大的要进所以代表我们台湾的经济是具有这个不管是 韧性也好，或是说我们的成长的这个动能也好，哈，其实都这个大家非常的肯定，而且股市目前也都是一直在创新高哈，那整个股市的市值也跃居到全球第5名哈，所以刚刚林董事长也跟大家提到台湾的竞争力哈，从这个上市柜公司的每天的这个成交值哈，还有我们的台股的这个市值就可以表现在这个全世界的大家的这个排名上面哈。那其实最近的 IMD 的这个排名把台湾的这个竞争力的一个这名次又往前推升到这个第4名哦。所以这个是真的是大家一起努力的结果。我想金融部门在这个里面绝对扮演非常重要的角色，因为现在许多的这个产业在做创新，在发展的这个升级转型的这个过程里面，绝对是需要靠这个金融部门来给予这个金融的支持哈。这一股这个资金的一个提供需要不断的持续来加大我们这个产业在创新研发在这个规模成长上面很重要的一股这个支持的力量哈。好，那但是我们其实在过去从这个美伊战争2月底到现在，其实这段时间我们政府也面临很大的挑战尤其我们在经济部面对整个我们这个能源的供给大概90%都是靠这个外购了哈，所以我们不管是在天然气、汽柴油，还有桶装瓦斯等等这些要能够确保供应无虞，而且要能够稳定物价这个其实在政府端我们也做了非常大的一个努力哈，我们希望能够确保民生的物价全年度能够控制在这个CPI 能够在这个2%以内所以行政院每个礼拜都会召开2次会议，一次由副院长所主导的这个稳定物价小组，一次由院长主持的美伊战争的整个情势的一个因应都把这个油气的供应，而且再加上这个物价的稳定列为很重要的一个议题的一个讨论的内容那所以我们在整个全球受到美伊战争的这样的一个冲击之下怎么在石化产业的一个供给上面能够让它不断链，而且让它对民生的供应然后让它对物价的稳定不会产生太大的影响其实我们做了很大的一个努力这个一开始石化产业这个供给出现了一些问题所以我们透过这个中油释出5000吨的这个乙烯能够来稳定国内的这个市场的一个这个料源的供应那确实也发挥一个稳定的一个力量那后面就也建立了许多一些这个物价平稳的一个机制包括这个各个产业如果有一些缺料的问题我们经济部这边就建立一个通报的一个系统那也随时能够来媒合各个产业在石化原料上面的一些不足那甚至跟地方政府也做了很多的稳定物价查价的一些动作所以这些措施都是为了整个因应整个全球经贸的一个环境的变化政府所采取的一些这个作为。那第二项就进入到我们今天的这个主题让大家了解一下，我们除了经济成长以外，其实我们在产业的绿色成长、绿色转型上面，我们怎么样去打造这个能资源的这个韧性，打造产业绿色的竞争力以及让金融部门能够来支持产业绿色转型的一个当作是一个加速器。这个其实我们也做了很多的一个努力那当然现在的能源转型大家也了解，其实推动能源转型是一件不容易的工作我们的行政院这个能源办的这个林副主任也在现场我们需要各种不同的绿电各种不同的能源我们都需要所以从这个太阳光电，从这个离岸风电 到地热到这个水力发电这个其实都是我们需要这个跟民众大家一起来努力在能源转型的这个议题怎么样能够让民众所担心的对环境造成的冲击能够降到最低当然现在很多的环境议题都需要透过社会沟通，需要跟许多的这个利益相关的团体大家来做面对面的交流所以我们也做了很多场的一些这个社会沟通我们希望能够让这个政府在做能源转型的相关的这些挑战，能够跟民间部门大家一起来合作而不是用对立的角色来看这个问题我们把它拉近到大家都是一个问题解决者其实发展绿电的过程也是对整个地球环保也是要做出贡献的而不是发展这个绿能发展的过程里面又在破坏环境这个当然是我们必须要关心的这个但是我们也都是一直在朝这个方向在推进我们在能源转型的过程里面，当然我们都会考虑到是不是对环境的一个维护，环境的一个压力不会造成太大的一个影响所以不管是这个公有屋顶工厂的屋顶民间的这个屋顶等等这些屋顶型的这种光电系统我们现在是大力正在推动当中那当然还有离岸风电也是很重要的一个电力的一个来源所以目前来讲，其实我们的这个太阳光电目前大概有15 G 左右了15 G 瓦左右的一个发电量那离岸风电大概有4 G 瓦但加起来大概20 G 左右了那再加上这个水力发电大概2点多 G 其实我们的这个能源转型其实虽然很辛苦，但是我们还是一步一步往前这个脚踏实地的在推动当中那包括我们的对离岸风电的一个设置其实我们现在也公布3+3的这个案场我现在正在受理申请当中那未来离岸风电的这个场域我们也一直在这个思考是不是还有更多的场域能够来设置离岸风电所以跨部会之间的合作就很重要所以我们也完成了一个盘点，所以未来离岸风电我们还是会大力的来推动所以这个也让我们离岸风电的业者要能够放心他们的投资会是一直不断的在往前那所以这个离岸风这个绿能推动的一个过程里面，除了我们的这个创能以外储能的话也很重要我们讲说太阳光电它可以扮演一个就是一个就是产业我们可能白天用的这些电力怎么样透过这个储能系统把它储存下来然后这个晚上一些这个尖峰发电的时候它可以来作为这个消峰填谷的一个这个备案所以我们现在正在推动这个表后储能那再搭配整个能源管理系统能够让整个节能能够做到更到位所以储能的这个推动也是搭配我们创能的部分那另外还有一个议题就是深度节能所以深度节能就是包括说这些公民企业还有我们家户的这个家电的汰换设备能源效率的提升以及建筑跟地方政府来共同推动一些这个建筑产业的一个节能的一个措施其实这些都是我们一起来大家一起必须要共同来努力的一个方向所以这个节能市场也可以造成很大的一个电力这个使用上的一个压力可以降低我们的这个电力要不断的要能够那个设电厂这方面的一个压力如果我们节能做得好的话， 其实我们过去做的这个绩效也都还不错哈。那也谢谢许多金融机构许多用电大户的一个配合哈。那另外就是我们未来在推展这个算力哈，尤其是 AI 的时代，未来这个算力跟电力哈都算是国力哈，所以为了要发展这个 AI 的这个为了要增进 AI 的这个需要未来稳定的这个电力供给电网韧性的强化以及我们按照核管法这个推动的这个核能再运转的目前的这个评估这个都是对未来能源的一个稳定供给都是很重要的一个议题哈。那另外水资源的开发也很重要我们现在把从南到北的水库用连通管的方式把它串起来就不会造成说这个南部缺水北部水库是满水位的这样的一个现象我们会有南北北中南这个水源的这个调度这个叫增出串的这个计划目前还有几个工程还在进行当中不过这个也发挥了很多这个我们和这个抗旱时期的一些这个就水源供给不会这个断裂的一个这样的一个效果所以这个是我们增出串的这个计划那当然就是未来产业的一个节能的部分，也是我们在策略2里面所要讲到的怎么样提升这个产业的竞争力那透过制程的改善、能源的转换，以及现在大力在推动的循环经济这些都是可以让产业可以做这个绿色循环能够提升它的绿色韧性的一个很重要的一个策略所以我们国营事业也在做这方面的一个节能这个让整个效能这个产业的制造的这个效能提升的一些工作那所以碳费的征收其实让许多的用电大户有很大的一个压力那所以碳费也让许多的这个用电大户就是每年度排碳量2.5万吨这个当量的这个工厂他们也开始做节能还有自主减量的一些工作所以未来这个部分我们经济部也透过许多的辅导还有补助的措施能够来协助大家做因应。那另外就是跟 ESCO 这个我们节能服务那个能源服务业大家一起来推节能的方案，对产业界来提供这方面的这个节能的这个服务。那当然需要这部分就需要搭配金融机构大家一起来这个给予 ESCO 的一个金融支持的一个力量因为在做能源效率的提升，可能需要做设备的汰换。那做设备的汰换就需要资金进来能够来让这个老旧的设备要能够去做汰换那所以这个部分就需要有金融的这个支持。那另外就是我们也才从这个减税贷款还有补助这几个措施能够来协助大家来推动这个绿色的这个转型所以产创条例在去年我们已经把它修正了说从这个奖励的这个额度在20亿元以内的采购金额都可以享有5%的这个投资抵减这个部分是我们现在许多产业正在面临到这个汰旧换新一个很重要的一个租税支持的一个力量那贷款的部分我们跟金管会我们也跟这个环境部未来也会利用碳费推出许多绿色贷款的一些协助的措施那当然低碳的这个补助也是我们持续透过科技专案科专的预算来补助我们所有的这个产业大家来做节能减碳。那当然最后一章绿色转型不再是选择，而是必须大家共同面对的一个前进的这个路程那所以未来政府产业跟金融机构必须要携手合作，我们才能够共同来面对 这个环境变迁的这个挑战，打造永续繁荣给韧性的台湾。好，以上是我的分享，谢谢大家。
谢谢，感谢次长精彩的分享，告诉我们台湾在全球变局当中推动绿色转型的政策思维以及行动方向，再次感谢。亚洲不仅是全球供应链以及制造基地的重要核心，也正在成为永续投资以及转型金融快速发展的关键市场。那么接下来我们邀请到的讲者是亚洲投资人气候变迁联盟的 CEO Rebecca McCullough-Wright 带来分享。Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our next speaker, the CEO of AIGCC, Ms. Rebecca McCullough-Wright, for her speech. 欢迎。CEO 将会以亚洲新动力、亚洲永续投资板块位移能量来带来分享。Welcome.
Is that too tall? Am I too tall?
Are you more comfortable without the stand? 那我们先将脚踏板移开。
Maybe I'll just move that out of the way. Thank you.
Thank you, please.
Good morning, everybody. So great to be here with you again. I've really enjoyed coming here a couple of times now, and it's great to see you all here and to hear about the progress that Taiwan's been making. So I'm just going to talk to you about the progress that investors have been making across the Asia region and also globally, and just to give you a sense of how Asia certainly is a really bright spot globally at the moment. That's very exciting, and I'm really honoured to, as AIGCC also goes into its 10th year this year, very hearty congratulations to Cathay on the 10th anniversary summit, to CK and Sophia and the team. I've been working with Cathay for over 10 years now, actually on their work to incorporate climate into their investments. So just to go through the shifting sort of global dynamics and a little bit just about the Asia Investor Group on climate change, for those of you who may not know. So we have three key levers that we work on that are in the orange there. How investors incorporate climate risks and opportunities into their policies and processes, how they engage with the companies that they're part owners of, and how they work with the whole system to ensure that the policies are working towards a net zero transition. So a little bit about the ecosystem and how those three key players that we're involved with, how they can create the change that we need to see across the system. So our theory of change is just how those three pieces interrelate with each other. And this is our sort of internal part of our strategy. Our ultimate goal is the dark green box there. Asian economies that are net zero emissions, they're climate resilient, and they're nature positive. And so we do this by influencing the capital allocation decisions of investors and the companies that they are part owners of. And we do this by, in the number one, to motivate and enable institutional investors to fulfil their legal responsibilities so they can help them understand the economics of climate change, how they assess the financial risks and opportunities of climate and nature, and how they can understand and use their ability to implement Paris-aligned investment practices, how they engage with policymakers, and how they engage with heavy-emitting companies. We work with to help influence corporate decision makers so they can set clear transition plans, including targets, decarbonisation strategies, and capital allocation, and help influence sector and system-wide factors, including public policy. And so investors also have a role to help influence and engage with policymakers so they understand the economics of climate change from an investor's perspective, have the political will to enact accelerating policy that enables more capital to flow, and that incorporates investors' perspectives. So ultimately, this leads to these capital allocation decisions away from unsustainable activities, including fossil fuel-based power generation, deforestation and land conversion, emissions-intensive industry, and high physical risk exposed activities, and obviously towards more economic activities that are more sustainable, as we've already started hearing today, including more renewable energy generation, credible transition technologies, decarbonising industry, and climate adaptation. And this all needs to be done in a fast, fair, but well-planned way so that economies can transition together. So we're moving into a really critical moment for climate capital globally. We heard Mr. Al Gore talking before about this perceived retreat from climate goals globally, whether it's from markets or from some companies. And I guess I just really wanted to give you some information about how investors are seeing this. And certainly from the ultimate asset owners, the institutional investors, this is certainly not the case. In fact, it's actually accelerating and they're doing more and more action and more incorporation on climate. So investors are really showing resilience in the face of these global challenges. But despite this global perceived retreat in climate commitments, and particularly with this geopolitical conflicts that we're seeing, Asian investors are really demonstrating a unique brand of resilience and perseverance, and particularly asset owners like Cathay Financial Holdings, other pension funds and sovereign wealth funds. And so their clients, the asset managers, also need to do more to keep up. Investors recognise that the economic cost of inaction is very severe and projected to affect about 16% of GDP in the region by 2050. And leading asset owners are really proving that strong long-term performance and material emissions reductions can be achieved in parallel. So this is really exciting news. We released a report just a little while ago called the Asia 2030 Climate Playbook, which I'll talk a bit more about in a moment, which really establishes this framing around 5%, over 5% long-term annualised returns, while they're achieving 50% emissions reductions to 2030 targets and allocating around 5 to 10% towards climate solutions. And over the last decade, some of the top performing pension funds have achieved an average annualised return of about 6.9% while integrating these factors. So that's really exciting. So we're now moving from ambition to implementation. For investors, we've really moved past this ambition, the target setting, and now into this implementation phase of climate action. And we've already heard from Mr. Gore earlier around, renewables are really the engine of implementation in terms of the real economy and lowering costs. We know that building solar and wind is now cheaper in many parts of Asia than building new coal or gas. In previous studies that we've undertaken, we've looked at the costs for building renewables such as solar, wind and batteries, and we've seen and we're hearing about this exponential decline in costs for these technologies, which is creating a $37 energy investment opportunity by 2050. And it's not just us that are saying this. We're seeing the renewables take over for the first time, taking over coal production and coal as an energy production source for the first time in the modern era. EMBA, a think tank, released its Global Electricity Review for 2026 and finding this unprecedented solar growth globally, and China adding more solar generation in 2025 than in the entire world combined in 2023. And we've heard about a little bit this morning about this rapid electrification across markets with the EV uptake and across particularly Southeast Asia, but also globally, really starting to show, and with the geopolitical conflicts, we're seeing a higher penetration and people moving to EVs to lower their costs of transportation. So I guess just to dig more deeply into what investors are doing and how they're doing this. So setting a net zero target without interim targets, so interim we talk about 2030 or 2035 targets, and credible plan for that transition, it really exposes investors to increasing reputational and implementation risk. So we are seeing implementation accelerate across the region, but there is a gap between commitment and execution that we're seeing. I mentioned before, managing climate risks is really key to investors' fiduciary duty, as they're responsible to protect and grow the retirement savings and pensions of millions of people, or operating on behalf of clients who need to do that. So our recent flagship report, The State of Investor Climate Transition in Asia, which is in the 7th year now, there's near universal recognition of climate risks, with 79% of 240 investors that we surveyed now recognising climate change as a material financial risk. And within our membership, so that's the orange line that's represented there, we have 100% of our membership, which hopefully is not a surprise, recognising climate change as a material financial risk. So really that that shows a strong foundation for moving to this awareness phase for investors in the region broadly into really consistent implementation in strategy, governance and stewardship. So what hasn't changed for investors? That climate change, climate risk is a material financial risk that has to be managed. And so we're seeing that we need to have active stewardship of the companies that investors are part owners of to help really drive the real economy change. We know that fossil fuel is critical to Asia's energy security needs, with Asia's power sector producing 54% of the region's total carbon emissions. So we know that we can't just divest away from coal and gas immediately. It's not the only solution to Asia. So it's really engaging with these companies to help drive this real economy change, to help these companies transition. And I think what we're really trying to get to is seeing really proactive company and investor and policy dialogues is going to get us to a faster transition when all of those actors start talking together. That's when we really see significant change. So we're starting to see some changes in investors' transition plans. So I mentioned we're moving from setting targets to practical portfolio implementation. And now the transition plans is the detail on how those targets and how those commitments are translated into real action. So investors are increasingly setting and showing commitments and targets, but their stakeholders, the regulators that govern them and their peers, are also questioning the credibility of transition plans as investors are asking companies about their own transition plans. So we need to see evidence of clear pathways, those interim milestones to get us to 2050, and real-world impact. But investors are only just starting to publish more of these granular climate transition plans. We have about 22% of investors more broadly, sort of from this regional cohort of 240 investors. And the reason that we are working very deeply with investors on these transition plans is that they're really a strong indicator that an investor has thought through their strategy to manage climate-related risks, capture opportunities that come from the transition, and align their portfolio strategy with a lower emissions real economy. Most investors in Asia are just showing limited details on the implementation of these plans at the moment, and that's something that we need to do more work on across the region beyond the work that we do with our members. So we know that nobody can take on the climate transition alone. Investors and governments recognise that. And so what we've seen, a real step change in the survey this year, is that investors are really increasing their direct engagement with policymakers across the region, and increasingly doing so through organisations like AIGCC. So we now have around 25% of the broader regional investor set advocating for clearer, more consistent investable frameworks. That's an 18% increase. But AIGCC members have tripled their reporting of policy engagement. So we've really been doing a lot of work with members to support their engagement with policymakers across the region, including here in Taiwan, and all the markets across the region. And we've been doing this for many years, but that has to increase because we need to have that systems approach. If you remember the theory of change diagram, we have to change the whole system, and the system needs to move together. And so that's why that policy engagement is really critical. So just to drill down, and I mentioned the asset owners are really leading this charge. And so we're seeing that, I mentioned in our recent playbook, we're really seeing these asset owners lead and have now overtaken managers in the region. And I mentioned this recent report where we're seeing this greater proportion of asset owners moving into more climate solutions investments. They want to invest more in climate solutions, and they're seeing proof that they can do this and get returns, as well as decarbonising their portfolios. And this is aligned with global asset owners as well. And so I think, you know, these are the very large pools of money, the trillions of dollars when they work together, that is moving in this direction, who want to invest in the transition. But it's really about unlocking the enabling environments and creating the enabling environments so that more of their investments can flow. So you can have a look at that report there, and it really sets out the different types of asset owners that there are for people who are not in the investment world. Hopefully that's useful. And then the rest of the report is for asset owners, really going through all the details of how they might be able to incorporate detailed strategies to integrate climate into their portfolios. And there's case studies of different global asset owners, how they're doing that within their portfolios successfully. So it's a really granular playbook that investors can use and talk about. And we've done roundtables here in Taiwan with investors and all around the region to really support investors, and so they can share and learn from each other in how other investors are doing this. And we're finding this is definitely accelerating investors' action by being in trusted peer groups. So we've heard this morning, and I think it's fairly plain for everybody, and we all understand now that energy security and independence means we need more renewable energy and ultimately leading to less fossil fuels over time. The things we need to do for climate are the same things we need to do for energy security. The same cause of fossil fuels causing global energy shocks when the supply chains are disrupted, as well as the impacts that fossil fuels are having on climate change. Different issues, but the same solution can resolve this. And that's the exciting moment that we're in and that we really have to double down on. So we've seen that obviously geopolitical conflicts have pushed up oil prices. They haven't deterred climate action. Instead, they're actually transforming renewables as a tool for energy independence and sovereignty and helping to speed up the transition. It may be hard to see that depending on where you sit and which market you're in and the cost of those fossil fuels, but certainly that's a trend that we're seeing in global markets. But obviously we have to, every market, every government has to deal with the short-term shocks to manage the current energy needs, but seeing how increased renewable energy can really help us transition faster to have more energy security independence and obviously the co-benefits that come with that. So we're starting to see that Asia's really ratcheting up its action and doubling down on renewables where that's able to happen. Obviously, China is treating this as a strategic opportunity to consolidate the clean technology manufacturing, and other Asian markets are taking advantage and importing their solar panels and the batteries to speed up their own domestic transitions. Indonesia is looking to fast-track their renewable energy rollout, and in the Philippines are looking at many deals to move them straight past new coal plant development, straight into renewable energy, so that they can bypass that process and move faster to renewables. The other, just going beyond carbon for just a moment, and I think we'll talk a bit more about this in the panel shortly, just going beyond carbon and getting into nature as a material financial risk. Obviously, nature and climate are two sides of that same coin. And we have 53% of GDP across the Asia-Pacific is dependent on nature. And that's direct dependence. The indirect dependence is much higher. And biodiversity is fast becoming a new benchmark for financial stability. We have physical risk and adaptation. We have these extreme weather events I mentioned already, which is going to impact about 16% of GDP in the region by 2050. And adaptation has certainly moved from a new focus to an explicit allocation target by investors now. The social dimension has moved from, it is much more of a place-based just transition. And planning ensures that the transition is practical, fair, it protects local economies, and it ensures social stability. As the Minister said, we need to work with the community. They're the ones who are on the ground, affected by the changes in the climate and also across the economy. So just briefly to finish up, I'm just going to give some specific examples on Taiwan from our recent survey that we released. That you can find online. We have, across the whole survey, as I mentioned, we had the 240 investors across the region, representing about $123 trillion. And this is just sort of the averages of the investors that we surveyed and the different markets that they come from. And then the Taiwanese statistics, so we surveyed 10 investors and you can see, and so we have about 8 asset owners and 2 asset managers. and many of these are AIGCC members, I'm really glad to say. And so we're seeing in terms of the interim emissions targets that they have and the climate solutions investment, we have 63% of asset owners have full or partial interim targets, so those short-term targets, and 100% of asset managers have climate solutions investments. And I know I'm at time, so I'll be finishing up very shortly, just the last couple of slides for the Taiwanese market. So I talked a little bit about the corporate engagement, how investors engage with the companies that they own. So about 50% of asset owners have climate voting guidelines for their managers, and 100% of asset managers have full or partial guidelines for voting in the companies that they own. And on the target side, for targets for engagement, we're seeing 13% of asset owners have full targets and another 50% have those partial targets in the pale blue or green there. And 50% of asset managers have engagement targets with their companies. And so this just gives you a sense of how investors are engaging with their companies. On the policy advocacy practice with Taiwanese investors, so we're sitting around about 38% of asset owners and 50% of asset managers are disclosing how they're doing their policy advocacy, and this has increased from the year before. And so it's great to see this uplift in line with the regional trend that I mentioned of that tripling of policy engagement by investors. So that is just a bit of a snapshot on what investors are doing and some of what Taiwanese investors are doing. So please go and have a look at the reports there. And thank you for having me here again today, and really looking forward to the rest of the sessions and providing more insights into how investors are increasing their activity on climate change and benefiting from that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. McCullough-Wright, for your insightful presentation. 谢谢，非常感谢 CEO 带来的精彩分享。我们这里再次非常感谢第一个阶段何次长 Ms. McCullough-Wright 还有林董事长在绿色转型、亚洲永续投资还有资本市场创新的精彩分享。各位现场来宾，我们接下来休息一段时间到10点45分。我们也提醒线上来宾，我们短暂休息到10点45分。那我们欢迎现场的贵宾可以至我们论坛场外的主题形象拍照区来打卡，留下美好的记忆。
现在这个时刻是亚洲，更是台湾掌握低碳转型话语权的最佳机会。过去每一次工业革命都没有解决外部成本要由谁来承担的问题。现在我们站在第5次工业革命的门口，这一次我们有没有机会一开始就把外部成本算清楚，并且由应该负责的来承担？那个时候还很少人谈 ESG， 更少人觉得金融业要积极参与 ESG。但我们在思考一个问题：服务超过1半台湾人的企业，除了问怎么赚钱之外，是否还要问赚这些钱在这个世界上留下了什么呢？推动永续最大的困难不是技术，而是观念的改变。要让同仁相信，这不是多做一件事，而是以 ESG Insight 的信念，把每一件事情做对做好。这过程花了一些时间，但今天回头看，值得。2021年，我们聚焦永续行动为气候、健康、培力3个主轴，再往下展开超过50项具体行动方案。在气候主轴上，国泰为台湾第1家前进 COP 南区举办论坛的金融业，站上联合国气候峰会的舞台，为台湾发声，并与世界各国精英交流，将最佳实务范例带回台湾。我们需要系统性思考气候变迁的问题，做出结构性的改变，才能缓解气候变迁引发的环境危机。 金融业正是这场气候革命的资本引擎。认清问题、倡议、承诺之后，接下来必须要展开实践。现在这个时刻是亚洲，更是台湾掌握低碳转型话语权的最佳机会。我们不要等待，国泰要做的是把气候行动的范畴继续扩大，从碳排、水资源到自然与生物多样性，从台湾到亚洲，整个产业净零转型，让台湾站上这场全球气候革命的前排。
台湾6大高碳排产业有超过50%的比例，我们每年都在积极的与他们展开气候对话。因为当企业受到气候变迁的影响，如果它不能够因应得好，它产生的负面冲击也就会变成财务风险。所以我们不只是做投资，而且是要做负责任的投融资。2017年，国泰成为台湾第一家加入气候行动100的金融机构。我们集合了超过600位的投资人，代表超过70兆美元的资产。而我们想要议合的公司占全球工业部门70%以上的碳排，这个影响力是非常非常的大的。这过程当然不是很简单，我们要去学习我们议合对象的产业状况，关心气候风险会不会影响他的生意。转型的过程中，除了挑战之外，机会在哪里？那我们可不可以把挑战跟危机变成商机呢？过去10年，我们证明了一件事，那就是做永续不用牺牲获利。我们金融机构就是带着好奇心去拥抱创新，然后带着使命感去帮助企业转型成长。我们对永续关注的议题已经从气候拓展到整个自然，再进一步包括到以人为本、公正转型。所以未来的10年应该是影响力的扩大、可行性的落实，号召公部门、私部门一起合作，透过投融资、赞助、捐款、让利性的补贴等等，大家一起来把一些好的案子升级。我们国泰期许自己不只是旁观者，所以我们支持了很多土地再生、海洋永续的专案计划，从山林到海洋。如果大家一起来做，每个人只要做一件事，台湾就会更永续。
人生最重要的2件事是健康与财富。进入超高龄社会，大家同时面对了健康风险与财务压力。国泰的目标是把时间轴拉长，不只让大家活得久，更要活得健康，活得有余裕。因为相信，所以看见。我们相信预防比治疗更有力量。2014年将健康正式纳入永续蓝图，从设计外溢保单到建立 Feedback 健康吧平台。2022年将健康结合环境与社会公益，推出步步公益走。今年已经迈向第5年，设定了更高的挑战目标，挑战1200亿步，捐赠1000万公益金。在2024年发布台湾保险业首份的保护健康年报，透过数百万保护的数据分析，将洞察转化为健康倡议与服务，协助民众精准管理健康。在2025年开始的国泰金控健康走，用实际行动让大众参与，一起让健康成为日常的生活实践。除了健康，国泰同时深耕保险、银行以及资产管理，管理的总资产达新台币13.8兆元。身为台湾最大的民营金控，我们更有责任成为客户全方位的财产守护领航者。在诈骗猖獗的时代，持续运用创新技术阻断金融诈骗，同时针对金融资源较不足的弱势族群，提供合适的商品与服务，树立台湾普惠金融的标杆。步步公益走，见证了每一步微小的步伐能汇聚成改变社会的能量。保护的健康年报则显示，国泰保护健康指标优于全国平均。这些实际证明，健康与财务值得更早一步的守护。国泰金控将持续整合集团资源，与员工、客户以及社会携手陪伴大家，活得更健康、更安心，也更具韧性，共创更健康的台湾未来。
我记得有一位在公司工作30年的一个同事，一开始在面对 AI 的工具，其实感到很不安。那一刻，我深刻体会到，所谓的培力，不是只是教会同仁一项技能，而是让人能够相信自己做得到。 在面对人口结构改变还有科技的变迁，国泰始终秉持着以人为本的精神。我们清楚界定哪些工作适合由 AI 来协助，哪些核心的价值应该要由人来承载。我们透过引进 AI 的资源，提升数位的素养，协助每一位同仁放大自己的价值。而根据调查，国泰已经有90%以上的同仁能够在工作上使用 AI。此外，我们透过举办 AI Demo Day， 促进跨公司的一个应用交流以及经验的分享，希望能够形塑正向开放的 AI 友善文化。我们相信，一起不只是1+1，透过协作的共创，年轻的同仁能够以科技力来协助资深的同仁提升他的工作效率，而资深的同仁也能够在协作当中传承他的知识跟经验，让大家在双向赋能当中看见彼此的价值。我们相信，人才是深化组织永续发展的关键的要素。国泰已经多次获得亚洲最佳企业雇主奖的殊荣。我们也秉持 Place for All 的核心精神，打造国泰共融小镇，一步步把共融变成日常，把尊重差异转换为组织的韧性与力量。国泰期待能够持续扩散正向的影响力，来支持青年、女性、高龄以及弱势的族群，以永续的行动来创造改变。金融业不只是资金的提供者，更是价值的领航者。国泰将持续透过多元弹性的资源以及友善共融的环境，让每一位同仁都能够找到归属，发光发热。而在社会，我们更将持续深化不同族群的培力的行动，让金融能够成为支持社会稳定前行的重要力量。
先生，欢迎回到上午场次的第二阶段议程。Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second session of the morning's agenda. 当气候行动逐步延伸至自然正向，生物多样性、自然资本以及生物信用额度也成为了全球企业以及投资人高度关注的新兴议题。而日本在近年来积极的推动自然正向行动以及相关的制度探索，他们的经验对于亚洲企业理解自然风险以及转型机会有非常重要的参考价值。因此呢，今天我们非常荣幸邀请到了来自东京大学农业及生命科学研究所的香坂绫教授带来演讲。And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the next speaker, Professor Ryoko Saka from the Graduate School of Agricultural and Life Sciences of the University of Tokyo for his speech. 教授将会以迈向自然、日本自然正向行动战略与生物信用额度发展为题，带来他的分享。Welcome.
So thank you very much for having me, President Lee and Vice Chairman Joseph Tsai. Thank you very much. I'm very happy that you're still there. Thank you very much. And actually, why I'm here, actually I met Sophia in March in our university. We had a second international symposium on Asian Biodiversity Credit Alliance meeting. And Rebecca has just mentioned that there are a lot of discussions about climate, but there are increasingly more on nature, resilience, and related topics. Actually, this meeting is very timely because from 14th to 16th of July, we're having a Nature Positive Summit in Kumamoto, Japan, where the world is gathering. And you know Kumamoto, Taiwan has invested a lot with the semiconductors. So they need nature, they need water, they need climate resilience discussions. So I really think this is a very timely event for our collaboration and also disseminating information to the world. On a personal note, actually, I'm very happy that I'm here. My father was born in Taipei, and my father used to be a Chinese professor teaching in one of the universities in Taiwan during the war period. But I wouldn't talk too much about this, but thank you very much. So today I would like to talk about the nature positive finance and the movement in Asia. I hope I can use this clicker. Well, so this is me. I had an honor to serve the United Nations on Secretariat on Convention on Biological Diversity. But from that time, we had a lot of connection with climate change. And then I served several universities. Now I teach where I graduated at the University of Tokyo in the forestry department. So if this is a classroom, I was going to point to you, but you can quietly think which quiz is the right answer. So there are a lot of crediting, and I'm sure you're familiar with. What's the rate for the ordinary credit rating matching with different schemes, and what are they for the ESG? And the answer is actually C. And this is where I think the science comes in. So why the credit rating tends to agree, the normal ones, the ordinary ones, where you guys are doing, is that evaluation objective is concrete and clear, and data is verifiable. Why ESG is somewhat, I would say, dodgy, is that different items measure each. Basically, they're measuring different things, and the methods is different, and maybe even the goal is different. So some companies might think, okay, the employing minority is a good thing, but on the other hand, some might think, okay, they're using these less favored persons in a very hard-working conditions. So this is a point I think we need discussions and maybe a lot more agreements. I know even in the climate areas, you have a lot of discussions and disagreements, but it is even more so the case for nature and biodiversity. So I think we need to discuss a lot on what we're going to measure and how we're going to measure and what our goals are. So climate change, there is some kind of a matching or a framework that you're agreeing on, but nature and biodiversity, the gap is larger. So that's where I think we need to work also closely with the finance institutions in the future as well. And nowadays, we do not look, okay, we used to be in the silos. The climate groups village were a climate village. The biodiversity group was in the biodiversity group. Water, energy were in a different group, I would say. But we're seeing increasingly closing of these trade-offs and synergies or nexus. So even discussing about where we should be planting trees, where should be doing these nature positive actions, we need to be aware what are the water circulations, what impact it would have for the climate change, and what kind of tree species are we planting, and how the land was used beforehand, and that's going to actually impact all the three or four dimensions. So it's a very complex things. And that's why I think it's very difficult for the bankers or the finance institutions to measure, oh, this is the right answer or this is not the right answer. So, but the science is also working quite hard to bridge these gaps. Nature positives, I think you're quite aware of, but it's not only about the green issues, but it's also about circular economy, and it's also about climate change adaptations. And it's a goal towards 2050. By the way, the term nature positive was unfortunately not in the official decision of the CBD COP. It was deleted because the developing countries and developed countries could not agree. But we say the spirit is still there and the concrete wordings, framing of these words are there. But it's also a contentious issue. It's not easy to bridge the gaps between the developing and developed countries. That's one challenge that we also need to challenge. Also, we call this the regime fragmentation, regime complex. We have a different institution in charge of different ecosystem areas or different legal issues or international regimes which are in charge of different parts of biodiversity. Of course, CBD is mainly in charge of many of the aspects of it, but for example, some parts of the ocean areas, they're with the other committee or with the other treaties. So it's not so easy, and the database are also fragmented in a way. The genetic parts are in charge, GBF is, for example, in charge, and so on. So for climate change, it's mostly maybe carbon issues, CO2. But for biodiversity, there are three dimensions: the genetic, species, and ecosystems. So at least there are three dimensions that needs to be there, and it's quite complex. But we are trying to come up with some kind of an indicator at the Kumamoto. So probably it will be good to monitor and watch what kind of indicators we're going to come up and who's going to be in charge. But I personally would see we still need some
够翘，没有屁股，我练的，叫罗晶晶，1.68米。
喜欢什么样的男生啊？
对好就行了。
喜欢大的还是喜欢小的男生？
喜欢大的。
对于自己全身上下最满意的部位是哪里？
够翘，没有屁股，我练的。
跟你谈恋爱有什么好处啊？
性格好，我很漂亮。
哎呦，
够翘，没有屁股，我练的。叫罗晶晶，1.68米。
喜欢什么样的男生啊？
对好就行了。
喜欢大的还是喜欢小的男生？
喜欢大的。
对于自己全身上下最满意的部位是哪里？
够翘，没有屁股，我练的。
跟你谈恋爱有什么好处啊？
性格好，我很漂亮。
哎呦，
够翘，没有屁股，我练的。叫罗晶晶，1.68米。
喜欢什么样的男生啊？
对好就行了。
喜欢大的还是喜欢小的男生？
喜欢大的。
对于自己全身上下最满意的部位是哪里？
够翘，没有屁股，我练的。
跟你谈恋爱有什么好处啊？
性格好，我很漂亮。
哎呦，
够翘，没有屁股。
And there has been no reliable data sets or models or scenario. These has been the hindrance in these areas. And now I think the President Lee has mentioned there is a systematic risk. And these needs to be addressed also in the field of nature and biodiversity. Private sector plays larger role than the public sector. there has been potential risk or reverse negative investment for the nature, and the amount is about 7.3 trillion according to UNEP estimation in 2023, which was published in 2026. And the private sector accounts for 4.9 trillion, and the public sector at the 2.4 trillion. And the positive ones are roughly 3%, 222 billion. These are the figures, but business and biodiversity assessment by the IPBES, by the scientific platform, this is not the individual company, but transformations needs to come from the sector-wise and also from the public sector, the policy sector as well. So we talked actually a lot in the CBD and the conventional biological diversity about negative subsidies or perversive subsidies, but that's about public sectors. So the world is watching now more closely into the parts what private sectors are playing. I'm sorry to start with a negative talk, but this is the tone right now at this biodiversity. But of course, changes are possible. And we need to think at the system level thinking, as President Lee has mentioned. This is one example from Nippon Life, nature finance approach, that they not just look at the sector-wise, but look at this biodiversity and nature issues in a systematic way, and also at the global level, at the, looking at the planetary boundary agendas. And they sort of look at the benchmark in more in these measurable amount of greeneries, which is HANPP, and also looking at the increase in the positive impact in the NPP. So it's a little bit simple for some ecologists, because as I said, biodiversity, nature is a complex issues. But it's a starting point to start discussions and also to make these more operational. So it's a kind of a trial to come up with some kind of a measurements in case of nature, and to make it more measurable and quantifiable and simple so that they can apply in their thinking of how these systematic risks can be decreased or avoided. And I would like to talk a little bit about biodiversity credit towards the end, as this is what was the topic that we discussed in March. So biodiversity credit also needs to meet all these 4 criteria as similar to the climate change or carbon-related credits. So the outcome has to be there, it has to be measurable, it has to last for some time, and there has to be some kind of additionality that the project demonstrates that it is because of these projects or actions that these positive impacts are there. And there are 2 types. One is the one, compensation type is something that probably you would be more familiar with. You can compensate and offset the loss that you make at a certain place. For example, UK, England, is trying to come up with, came up with legal schemes that that they need to come up with 10% increase of through these offset schemes when they conduct a certain developmental schemes. But there are also some more voluntary contribution type. I think the Australian government is towards this line, that it's free from the offset pitfalls, but enable more quantitative demonstrations and recovery contributions. So there are pros and cons about different credit types, but I think the discussions is already starting, and we need to think about these. And there were some lessons that we learned from the credit, that there are some caveats in this credit schemes, at least, that some of the academic institutions are pointing out, that actually 16% of credit reflected in the real emission probably it's much better than doing nothing, but we need to be able to track these traceabilities a bit more better. And sometimes the baseline standards and incentives are not clear. And last but not least, the equity and inclusion for the communities are also required in many cases. So these are the challenges also that the biodiversity credit would need to face. And I think it will be quite useful that Taiwan or India or many other parts of the world will exchange these views and experiences when we establish biodiversity credits. And we're not alone. So what business can do, finance can do, and we academics can do, government, civil societies can do together. There are many things that we can work together in these kind of incentives. I think we can talk about these during the next sessions. And we should do walking the talk, so we should identify priority scopes, run maybe with a smaller pilot projects, and link it to rules and try to standardize them so that it could spread across Asia and beyond. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and I hope I was in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kosaka, for your wonderful presentation. 我们再次感谢香板教授带来的精彩分享。Please return to your seat. Thank you very much. 我们先请教授回座。好的，在几场精彩的专题演讲之后呢，我们接下来即将要进行上午场次的综合座谈，主题是亚洲永续金融韧性战略。After a few very wonderful and inspiring presentations, we will now proceed to the morning panel discussion titled Resilient Strategies for Sustainable Finance in Asia. 在全球治理以及市场环境充满不确定性的时刻，亚洲永续金融该如何兼顾长期价值、务实的推进以及韧性布局，是政府、投资人以及企业共同必须要面对的重要课题。因此，我们今天上午的座谈将会从政策、投资、自然正向以及实践等多个角度来深入探讨亚洲永续金融的下一步。那么各位来宾，邀请您借用您的双手，跟我们一起欢迎本场次的座谈主持人。请欢迎安侯永续发展顾问公司黄正中董事总经理步上舞台就座，欢迎。Please welcome our moderator, Managing Director of KPMG Sustainability Consulting, Mr. Niven Huang. 接着是我们今天的语坛嘉宾 ，our wonderful panelists. Please welcome CEO of AIGCC, Ms. Rebecca McCullough-Wright. 我们再次欢迎亚洲投资人气候变迁联盟 CEO Ms. Rebecca McCullough-Wright， 以及东京大学农业暨生命科学研究所香坂林教授 Professor Ryo Kosaka of the University of Tokyo。接着邀请金融监督管理委员会庄秀元副主任委员，欢迎。Please welcome the Vice Chairperson of Financial Supervisory Commission, Ms. Sherry Chong。接着我们欢迎国泰金控陈淑芬资深顾问。再次来到台上，欢迎。Please welcome Ms. Sophia Cheng, the Senior Advisor of Cathay Financial Holdings, to the stage. 我们再次欢迎以上的嘉宾来到舞台上。好，请就坐。接下来的时间，我们就交给主持人黄董事总经理。Welcome。
谢谢。那因为今天我们这个 panel 呢，主要有2位国外的贵宾，所以我们这个 panel 主要就是用英文来进行。Because we have 2 distinguished panelists and also Sherry Zhang from Taiwan government. So I would like to run this panel in English. I think that will be fine for everyone. And then we also have a simultaneously translation. My name is Niven Huang. I'm very pleased to be invited by Sophia and CK for Cathay Financial Holdings' 10th years climate summit. I get involved in climate change in 1997. This year is my 30th year in climate change advocacy. Then I have been invited to participate the first summit of Cathay Financial Holding 10 years ago. So this year is also very critical for me, and it's quite meaningful. So I'm very pleased to moderate this panel. As you already know quite well, the current situation of the climate change, we have already touched upon periodically the 1.5 degrees centigrade warmer comparing to the average temperature in 1880. That means adaptation become very, very important for all of us. Then we have already witnessed that the extreme weather event now is going on in Europe. You can see the air conditioning, electrical fan become, the hot sales product in Europe. So it is an incredible current situation that we have to all face the reality of the climate change. And we also witnessed 5 years ago the COVID-19. So if we have a more and more serious situation of biodiversity loss, and then the next, the unexpected but infectious disease to attack the whole world, then we might face another very dilemma situation is there might be possible no vaccine, because a lot of vaccine should depend on the biodiversity. So the climate change will also cause a big threat to all of the biodiversity. So now we are facing something like an interconnected situation. But unfortunately, we have a geopolitical conflicts. Then we have some other political leaders in the whole world. Now they are reluctant to take much more proactive climate action. So something like if we are looking the next 3 decades of development up to 2050, then whether we do have a very big opportunity to achieve net zero. So we gotta do a lot of planning how we can take the challenges and how we can walk the talk, just like Professor has already mentioned. But here in Taiwan, I would say that we have a very lucky, because our financial authority, they are much more proactive in providing the policy framework. So I think in this panel, we will run this panel in 3 rounds to ask the different key questions to our distinguished panelists. And then we hope that we will have a very inspiring, interactive panel discussion for today's key topics. Then I would like to raise my first question to every one of the panelists. The first round will focus on the new race landscape in Asia about sustainable finance. The first question I would like to go to Rebecca. Rebecca is my colleague. A couple years ago, we were together in ASRIA, Association of Sustainable Responsible Investment in Asia. That is a Hong Kong-based association. I think that you have already highlighted, based on some survey, the current investor attitude, and then also the current situation based on your survey, a very inspiring information. And from your perspective of Asian investor organization focused on climate change, what is the current the climate transition risk evolving here today? And then what does it mean? What is the major the business implication to Asia? And our investor priorities begin to shift based on what is going on right now in the whole world landscape, but come to the Asia landscape. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Niven, and so lovely to be here with you again and see you again. I've been working with you for a long time now. So I think overall the signals are clear. The market level signals, the targets that individual sort of countries and markets have put in place in terms of their climate goals, they're there. And we're starting to see regulation and policy come through to support that. But it needs to happen faster, and we need more detail. You've talked about whether it's the heat waves in Europe this week or drought in Taiwan, different weather impacts that we're seeing all around the world, but particularly in this region, which is so affected. But I think for investors, transition risk to them is policy risk. And so the biggest barrier that investors have to putting the very large amounts of money and capital that they do have is lack of clear and consistent policy signals. So that's the number one thing that they're looking for across markets. So what is that 2050 target, the overall target? How ambitious is that? Is it sufficiently ambitious to get that economy to net zero? And then when you backcast from that, what are the underlying policy signals? So the 2035 target is the most recent one that many countries submitted last year. And so that's great, but are they ambitious enough? Is that 2035 target going to get us on track to 2050? And then investors are looking for the sector level plans. So how is the carbon budget going to be allocated across the whole economy, across the different sectors? And they need this detail of the sector plans to break down that carbon budget so they can decide where they put their money to work. And then they take that bottom-up perspective where they engage with their companies and saying, well, which sector are you in? What does that sector pathway look like for you? What does your company transition look like compared to the whole of economy sectoral transition? How does your company fit in? Are you going to be successful for the short, medium and long term with the climate impacts that are impacting your particular company, your assets, your supply chains, your energy sources? How are they going to be affected by floods, heat today, this week? This is not a future problem, we know that now. So investors are trying to see that bottom-up company level impacts of climate today, but matching it back to those longer term signals. And so investors are asking for company level detail. They need to see that policy level detail too. And that's what's not quite there yet. We have to get more of those signals so that we know, so that the really big companies can, how their transition to 2050 is looking, but we also need to scale up the solutions. So I mentioned the progress investors are making. They're investing more in climate solutions, they're getting good returns, so this is all good news, but it's not happening fast enough, and it's not happening with big enough amounts of money. Investors have, our members represent, I think, $35 trillion US, but only a portion of that is going towards this transition directly. So there's no shortage of capital, but it's about how do we get that capital moving through the economies faster. Investors want to deploy that, but they have to have confidence in those policy signals that they're putting their money in, particularly these long-term asset owners that think in terms of multi-decades for the pensions in 50 years' time. They need to have the confidence that those policy signals and where their money's going is going to be able to get those sustainable returns. So I think that's sort of one of the biggest barriers that'll help unlock if we can get more detailed granularity in the sort of the market policy signals and regulatory settings. And investors want to work with governments to help design them so that the capital can then flow.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think because of the global leaders, some of them has been already stepped back, and then we are afraid of a lot of Asian political leaders might also follow that. So the policy risk will become, has a very huge impact to the financial sector, to the sector leaders. And then you also mentioned about that we do have a very good climate-friendly solution, but how to scale up the deployment rate of those kind of very promising technology for climate tech, and then it's just too slow to scale up. So we're going to speed up, and then we need more key stakeholders to collaborate together.
I'll just say only one country's gone out of the Paris Agreement. Everybody else is still in. So let's not get too caught up with the headlines. I know there are big implications, but what gives me what gives me hope is when I talk to the asset owners, the pension funds, the sovereign funds, they have the long-term time horizons. Honestly, they say this is a Trump bump. Like this is a short term, not to say that it's not very disruptive, but it's relatively short term for them.
Exactly.
They are looking much longer term than this, and they have to manage all of these types of crises and risks. So this is a relatively short term risk for them, but I understand the media and the daily things that come out can be very distracting, but I encourage everyone to look past the headlines, focus on what asset owners are doing, because that's where the direction of travel is.
Yeah, that's a really good point, short term and long term. Otherwise, if we misjudgment the current situation, that will completely a nightmare. Then I would like to come to our vice chairperson of Taiwanese Financial Supervisory Commission. As I have already emphasized that we are very lucky to have a very proactive financial authority. So now our policy framework has already moved from green finance to sustainable finance, and now prioritize transition finance and also nature-related issues into the mandatory regulatory for the listed company that need to be much more transparent in information disclosure. So could you please share with us what are the major key drivers for pushing our financial authority can lead us in building up gradually a better, it can be also much more leading policy framework in Asia?
Thank you, moderator, for your nice word to financial authorities. I think the evaluation reflects a very important shift in sustainable finance. In the past, sustainable finance was often understood mainly as green finance, supporting renewable energy, green buildings, or activities which are in line with environmental objects. But today, the risks are broader, more connected, and systemical. I will highlight 3 key drivers behind the expansion from green finance to transition finance and nature-related finance. Firstly, climate and nature are no longer separate issues, as Rebecca mentioned in her speech. They are the 2 sides of a coin. The international community increasingly recognizes that climate change and the natural losses are deeply interconnected. We cannot solve climate and we cannot solve the climate crisis without protecting nature. We cannot protect nature without addressing climate change. Natural ecosystem, forests, oceans, wetland, soils, and mangroves absorb carbon and protect community from extreme weather. They are not only environmental assets, they are essential infrastructure for the resilience. Second driver, green finance alone is not enough to achieve net zero. Many Asian countries still rely on carbon-intensive industry, such as steel, cement, transportation, power generation, and the manufacturing supply chain. These sectors may not be green today, but they are essential to the economy and urgently need capital to transform. This is why transition finance is so important. The focus is shifting from simply asking whether an activity is green to asking whether a company has credible and measurable transition pathway. For Taiwan, this is especially important because we are deeply integrated into global technology and the manufacturing supply chains. Supporting orderly transition is therefore not only an environmental issue, it is about industrial competitiveness and the economic resilience. Third, nature loss is becoming a financial risk. Nature used to be seen mainly as a conservation issue, but now it is increasingly understood as a financial and economic issue. More than half of global GDP depends directly and indirectly on ecosystem services. When biodiversity declines, water resources become unstable, or ecosystems lose their ability to absorb shocks. Business and the financial institutions are also affected. For financial institutions, nature is no longer outside their balance sheet. It is increasingly relevant to risk management, capital allocation, and credit quality, long-term investment decision. So to summarize, the evolution is driven by three forces. Climate and nature is interconnected. Net zero requires financing a real economy transition, and natural loss is becoming material financial risk. For regulator, our role is to help the market move in the right direction by providing clear role framework, strengthening disclosure, improving data, and guiding capital toward activities that support both transition and resilience. Sustainable finance is no longer only about what is green today. It is about focusing a more resilient, low carbon, and nature positive economy for tomorrow.
Thank you very much. I think based on this morning's previous section by some keynote speakers already highlight the fact that Taiwan is small, but Taiwan is really big in terms of a lot of economic data. But we are a small island. We don't have a fossil fuel. We don't have enough key material. So we got to continue to improve the resource productivity. So you have already highlighted, no matter in some other Asian country, but I think in Taiwan in the past few decades, then we also quite strongly dependent on fossil fuel. And now, based on the Middle East conflicts, the geopolitical problem, then we can see the too more dependence on the fossil fuel and much, much less resilience. So we got to continue to improve to reduce the carbon emission and try to build up more circularity that will become Taiwanese another new era's competitive advantage for moving forward. Thank you very much. Focus on the driver behind our much more proactive policy framework. Then I would like to come back to Professor Kosaka. We are not very familiar with you. Appreciate Sophia to introduce you to all of us. But when you mentioned your father was born in Taiwan, everybody laughed because that means something, not just only for you, also for every one of us. So welcome home. Yeah, you already mentioned that a lot of initiative happening in Japan. I was in Tokyo last week. I also met some of your friends in biodiversity, nature positive community in Japan. Japan business has been already getting involved in those areas, biodiversity, nature positive. Could you please highlight based on those kind of development in Japan, maybe already for 20 years, 2 decades? Then what is the current situation? Do you think that the most pressing challenges in biodiversity, nature issue that all of the Asia need to face?
Okay. When I started at the CBD was 2006, and the first COP I joined was in Brazil, and it was the first decision that was taken about private sector is back in 2006, and it was a very small venue. When I think about it, it was relatively small. Now the number of private sector that are involved has increased a lot. The financial, we even had a finance day in 2020 back in Montreal. So in this last 2 decades, the interest of the business sectors has increased quite high. And also there has been concrete measures. So at the beginning, we talked that, okay, it's not only about civil society and government talking, but we need to involve business because you're part of the problem, but you're also part of the solution, right? And I think we agreed in this Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It's a very long name, I'm sorry, because we initially planned to do this in Kunming, but because of the COVID, it moved to Montreal, so it's called Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In the Target 15, we have a business-related target which says that we should, or the big business basically, and the international ones, including the financial institutions, should disclose in a very transparent manner. That's the monitoring indicators, so to speak, that we have to date. So we started in the beginning. We need to involve you as a finance and business sector, and then we are now at the stage that we have a very concrete target. The step forward, for example, in Kumamoto and others, I think would be, it's involving the mid to small size institutions as well. I think this is also a challenge in climate change as well. But I think the big ones have these equator initiatives and all the arrangements and things, and they also need to act in an accelerated manner. But what we're witnessing right now in Japan and the worldwide is quite interesting. For example, in Kumamoto, okay, Taiwan is big in the semiconductors, and we have this all the business also invested in Kumamoto and other parts of Japan. And at the beginning, people used to say semiconductors, ICT, they're good for environment. You don't need resources, it's quite good. But people are now realizing you need water, and it's sometimes noisy, maybe, and you need areas, and also you need the community, basically. So people are starting to realize, okay, ICT and all these big, gigantic AI-related companies, they also need to be aware of this environment. And now what is happening, for example, in Higo Bank, which is a regional bank in that area, they said, okay, we're going to establish a fund and bring that money back to the mountain and river basin, basically, the upper stream, and they're going to do some kind of a conservation activities so that the waters can come down. And Kumamoto is also a very water-sensitive area because they're using underground water. So these are the topic that we have to be, I think, aware. So it's quite interesting. So honestly, at the beginning, the biodiversity discussion focused a lot on the supply chain, and okay, we were dependent on international supply chains and so on. That's also important. We rely a lot on resources from Australia to other parts of the world, and wood we import from America, or also developing countries. But we're also witnessing some local to regional areas. And also banks are also playing a critical role there, banks or financial institutions. So there are several layers. I think we need to discipline, or I would even be arrogant to say we need to educate the investors that you guys need to be aware of these nature aspects or climate change-related aspects. That's the upper layer, but also we are seeing changes in the regional level. That's, for example, in a water basin level, that, okay, waters are flowing into these areas, or we're using these grasslands to capture water. So we need to invest in these conservation areas. So blue carbon ecosystems, as you mentioned, mangroves and so on, these are all local issues, local and regional issues. So we need to involve these areas, not only the big ones, but the big ones also need to team up, or the government also need to team up with the regional ones. So I think that's the point that we're aiming for sustainability. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving the Japanese case. I think in Asia right now, not just only now, I think in the last couple of years, Asia has already become the global products manufacturing center. And now the AI value chain, Asia also play very important. We need high-tech semiconductor, we need chip, but behind that, energy, water, biodiversity, local community. You know, I'm not sure whether you know that recently there was one Gallup, the public pools survey results has already highlighted that a lot of community in the United States, they do have some big plan for building the data center, but their people mentioned they prefer to live nearby the nuclear power plant and not to live nearby a data center. So the water, noise, and a lot of issues become a headache. So the social license to operate is already raised the attention by the general public, and nature issues, water material consumption that will become very, very important. We look forward to have more attention on this area. I think within Asia, that is something like nobody can do it alone. We need to have more collaboration among different kind of key stakeholders in the society, locally, regionally, and in Asia Pacific. Now I would like to come back to Sophia. Sophia has been already become a very, not just only the queen of investment, but also a pioneer in climate change and sustainability, a very, very important opinion leader from financial sectors. And based on your experience and what the great efforts have been already done by Cathay Financial Holdings, could you please share with us why resilience is so important for financial institutions corresponding to the current pressing regional, local challenges in energy, climate, nature, biodiversity, and even including social, etc.
Thank you. It's amazing witness the variety of topics since 10 years ago to today, from climate awareness. And then as a vice chairman and the other speakers said, that expand from climate to biodiversity, nature, and now even impact investing and people-centered solutions. So there is a trend that people care more about other things, not just other human beings, but also animals, everything, because without resilience, no one can sustain long. And I believe in early years, when we talk about ESG, we talk about the balance between governance, social, and environment. But over the past 5 years, we're seeing that the common belief is without a sustainable society and a sustainable environment, economic growth and company earnings cannot be sustainable. So Cathay Financial Holdings, we started our responsible investment journey in 2014, and we're so lucky that we met Rebecca at that time to learn about PI and everything. 2016, we were one of the 7 founding members of AIGCC, and since that, we start to participate in many global initiatives, including Climate Action 100+, Asia Utility Engagement Program, series valuing water engagement. We helped the designs, as we mentioned. Last year, we actually sponsored a series, research on how technology sector, especially AI data center, is affecting the water sustainability in the world. And after that, we work on biodiversity, farmland carbon credit, regenerative agriculture, and we also are one of the earliest in sponsoring the development of biodiversity credit. And that's how we met Rio earlier this year. And the reflection of what we have done in the past 10 years is that we believe corporate is so directly connected with climate and nature. And when they talk about not just climate, but also nature, we think about action. It should not just be decarbonization. It should also be participating, contributing what we can, cross-sector collaboration. And every day of our business, we think about how we are affecting nature, affecting society. And therefore, I'm so glad to see, as Rio mentioned, we now talk more about nature positive. And so we need cross-area collaboration among all the stakeholders. And then second point I'd like to highlight is about Taiwan, because Taiwan is very exposed to frequent and drastic natural disasters. We have typhoons, we have very unstable water resources, and we also need to care about a lot of import on food and crops and also energy. So we also have to care about food security and energy security. But at the meantime, we need to fulfill our leading position in global supply chain. So the climate change and impact nature has already become an even more severe risk to cross-border business relationship. So I'd like to highlight that the resilience is so important, but today if we look at the global allocation of funding to these topics, according to Climate Policy Initiative reports, global climate finance already reached around $1.9 trillion, but 90% works on mitigation. So as the climate change trend already cannot be reversed, we need to put more resources into adaptation. And so today, as of now, Cathay Financial Holdings, including investment and loans, we have already allocated into low carbon investment, infrastructure, water resource, and also financial inclusion. Altogether is almost $2 trillion Taiwan dollars. We are the first to join Climate Group RE100 initiative, and very proudly that we are the first global financial institution who also joined 24/7. Thank you, Sam, for making the promotion on this meaningful action in the world. And our bank, Cathay United Bank, also work on CTP to help to teach SME how they should be more aligned into this global movement. So sustainability is not just the right for large companies, especially in Taiwan. We have so many SMEs, they also need help. We also work on green land load, for example, because we have more than 200 office buildings. We offer renewable, we help the tenant, SME company to procure renewable energy. So what I try to say is we try to, when we learn something, we try to think about who else will be affected. Can we learn early? Can we promote early? Can we help early? If this is something we need to do in 3 years' time, why not do it today and make it special? Why not call people to action earlier than later?
Thank you very much. I think as you have already mentioned that more than 90% of Taiwan area will be significantly affected by 3 kinds of nature disaster. So we always struggling with a lot of those kind of impact because of the climate issues. But now, because climate has been already changed, so extreme weather event, and then also the reality is we don't have water, we don't have energy, we don't have a key material, and then because we also very strongly dependent on the global supply chain. So no matter that it's a geopolitical conflicts or some other global risk, then every key risk always impose significantly impact to Taiwan. But in the past, we are very strong because we are a vulnerable area, but we are very capable to stand up, and then so resilience is quite okay. But more and more complicated issue, interrelated risk. So we got to build a much more better, strong capability for taking those kind of a challenge, especially now that our financial institution become bigger and bigger. Now we can become more and more important key role in Asian financial market and capital market. So I think this sooner or later will become even strategic or the bold issues. So we need to be ready for that new era for the financial sector to become very good enabling role to support Taiwanese resilience corresponding to a lot of pressing challenge. Now I'd like to move the second run. The second run will focus on bankable, investable project. Actually, we do have a lot of money, capital. We are not facing the shortage of capital, but we are facing the big gap of the capital we need for net zero, circular economy, etc., even for the biodiversity nature related investment and this moment. So we are facing a very big gap for the capital we need to achieve the promising sustainable future. But the problem is, if we look at the current situation, we must also face a lot of dilemma, including the policy framework. Rebecca, you mentioned investable framework. So we do have those kind of bottleneck. Could you please share with us, if we want to close the gap, no matter that is for the net zero investment, circularity investment, nature-related investment, as this morning, then I think CK has already mentioned that we need every year $4 trillion for net zero, but currently, Sophia just mentioned, we just only have 1.3 trillion available now. So the big gap need to be filled. Otherwise, it's not possible to achieve sustainability. But what will be the bottleneck in Asia, you think, if we look at, we try to improve the situation, investable, bankable, then what is your idea? Please share with us.
So I talked already about the policy environment and that it's not, the environment isn't yet suitable for this investment to move at the scale required. So that's, and the sort of the roadmaps, the sector-specific roadmaps that really, so that investors can see how sort of the national level targets will translate down to sort of asset level. And I think as investors talk to companies that they engage with, in the Climate Action 100 Plus initiative, we have the three main goals of asking what climate governance looks like at a company level and how sort of that runs through an organisation from the top all the way down to different asset levels. What's the decarbonisation strategy or the business plan for that business to transition over time? The different short, medium, long-term targets. And so we've been asking, and then the third one is how companies are disclosing against that. So that's sort of the three big buckets of questions that investors are looking for. And we've been increasingly getting more granular in the questions. So in the last few years, we've been going further and looking at what is the capital allocation and the capital expenditure that big companies are putting towards these solutions. And the numbers are very low. And so this was when investors started seeing this, they're like, right, you've set these targets, you've set 2050 targets, 2035 targets, 2030 targets, but the money you're putting into achieving those targets doesn't match up. You're saying there's ambition there, but your implementation is putting your money where your mouth is a saying that we use a lot. So, there's not enough money, whether that's going into R&D of new technologies or transitioning different business models. So I think coming back to the policy signals, they're not sufficient. The companies aren't getting the right signals from government. Investors are trying to talk to companies about what they want at a really granular level and talking about what they expect to see from the companies. But investors, have certain tools available to them. And as I mentioned before, investors can't diversify away from climate risk. You could become a net zero investor tomorrow if you wanted to, but that would just be on paper. It doesn't really mean much when the climate change is still happening around us. You're still going to be exposed, and particularly big asset owners and pension funds, they own, a small bit of all of the economy, particularly if it's your home market. So you can't escape climate change risk. So you have to engage, and you have to engage responsibly with these companies. So it's about getting those signals right and telling companies what investors need to keep their money in that company, to keep investing in that company for the future. If they have the confidence in the transition plans that the companies are providing, then investors will have confidence that, okay, we understand where you're trying to go, we understand how your company is trying to transition, we understand your challenges, and we want to work with you on addressing those challenges, but you need to show us progress. But at the end of the day, if the signals aren't there from the policymakers, then companies won't move fast enough. That's why investors have been asking globally for mandatory disclosure in their markets. It's not often that a group of stakeholders asks for more regulation. But investors have asked this for the companies, and now they're doing it themselves because voluntary disclosure didn't get the information investors needed to make those investment decisions. So they have to have that sort of mandatory environment. So that's starting to come in, but it's sort of taking too long. And disclosure is only one part. At the end of the day, it's about the actions that the companies are doing. So, we need to see stronger carbon pricing across markets. And we're starting to see the carbon border adjustment mechanism out of Europe starting to have flow-on effects to other markets as markets adjust to that so that their industries remain competitive and so that they're not going to be disadvantaged by selling their products into Europe with a sort of a higher carbon price on them. So that's kind of a market signal globally. But we need to unpack, and I think part of it is that the fossil fuel subsidies particularly are sending mixed signal to investors. So if you're subsidising fossil fuels and energy production on one side and you're trying to say, oh yes, please invest in renewable energy over here, that sends mixed signals to investors and it's confusing and it will only increase the cost of capital for low carbon or renewable energy projects. And so we have to remove those subsidies and then the market will actually work out the most efficient mechanism, which is to move to lower carbon, more renewable energy. But it's removing those distortionary signals that will allow the companies to move faster and then the investors can move beyond that. There's blended finance models as well, which is about kind of getting the smaller scale solutions up and running, nature and the physical risk and resilience, and we need to definitely increase that work. But back to the point, investors need investable markets, not investable products. You can do all the blending, you can put all these projects together, but they're not going to be big enough for the really big amounts of capital. So again, it's about that in creating those investable markets and not to say that it's all about policy. It's not the only answer, but it all has to happen together. I think that's the point. It's all got to move together. It's not investors waiting for policy, companies waiting for policy. It's about everybody designing the system and particularly including the nature piece, the social piece. And I think there's a really great opportunity there as there is this more awareness about these new issues of this being able to integrate. And I think we can learn the lessons from working on climate for many years and leapfrog and use the frameworks that we've used in climate and use them for nature. They've come through much faster. And so now it's about building it in and integrating it, not sort of pivoting to something else. It's all part of the same issue, but also the same solution.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think just like Professor Kasaka mentioned that walk the talk, right? So now the business has already given a lot of promise about the walk the talk, no capital allocation on the practical action, especially the bold action that can drive the technology innovation, but also achieve the triple bottom line. So on the other hand, that you also mentioned in your slides that you have already emphasized that the 5-50-10 that is possible for investor. So investor is demanding a lot of practical project for investing, but sometimes a lot of bottleneck for the policy framework is not very friendly. So how we can work together to unlock some of the policy that we can create much more investment-friendly, investor-friendly circumstances for moving everything forward together. I think that is really important. Then I would like to come to the Vice Chair regarding to the perspective of policy and regulatory. What do you think, how to create a better investor or bankable, investable, friendly situation that can motivate and speed up and also to enhance the transition opportunity for the private sector, but also the financial institution to work together so we can achieve better consequence corresponding to different kind of challenges.
Okay, thank you. I think if we want to review how can we cooperate closely, we needed to review what's the root issue of that. is there any kind of gap between investors and the investee? So I think actually the market is not short of capital. You can see ours, at least in Taiwan, you can see the stock transaction volume increasing every day. So in fact, the key challenge is not capital, but confidence. What we are facing is a gap between available capital and the bankable transition project. This gap is often driven by uncertainty, unclear standards, insufficient data, and limited visibility on a credible transition pathway, especially for carbon-intensive sectors. So here comes the regulator side or perspective. From a regulatory perspective, our role is to reduce the uncertainty and build the trust. I will highlight the 3 areas we can work on. First, establishing a common language. Companies and financial institutions often assess transition differently. Tools such as Taiwan Sustainable Taxonomy and suggested element for transition plans help both sides align their expectation. They help companies articulate a credible transition strategy and provide financial institutions with a more consistent basis for risk assessment and financing decisions. When both sides speak the same languages, more projects become financeable. Second, enhance credibility and verifiability. Financial markets do not respond ambition alone. They require evidence. This is why transition action must be measurable, practical, and accountable. So we encourage companies to submit quantifiable and externally review emission reduction plans and the transition project. Once it is approved, this plan provides a stronger and more objective foundation for financing decisions. This helps capital flow to projects with real impact and measurable progress, rather than just claim that are difficult to verify. Third, strengthening engagement between finance and the real economy. Transition finance cannot be built only through frameworks. It must be grounded in real industrial transformation. This is why FSC, together with financial industry net zero platform, where the Cathay Financial Holding is one of the members, is facilitate a structured dialogue with high-emitting sectors. This year, we would organize 4 dedicated sessions with carbon-intensive industry, including sectors such as semiconductors, transportation, and other key transition areas. The purpose is not only discuss, it is to identify, incubate, and structure financing ready transition project. Through this engagement, financial institutions better understand industrial needs, while companies learn how to design projects that meet financing requirements. This is how projects move from concept to bankable pipeline. At the same time, we continue to refine policy tools, including expanding the taxonomy to cover more industries and the transition activities, so that more sectors can connect to sustainable finance. Ultimately, transition finance is built on trust. When frameworks are clear, data is credible, and the engagement is active, capital will flow to the project. the real bottleneck is not funding. It is building confidence at scale. Thank you.
Yeah, I think a pretty clear message. I think the first one is a common language. The second one is credibility, verifiable, assurable, auditable outcome. And the last one, I think very important, is the business cases. We gotta benefit everyone, especially benefit the return or benefit to the investor and financial institution. Now I would come back to Professor. You mentioned that the Japan's situation, the development, historical background back to 20 years ago on nature biodiversity. Then what are the current biggest barrier you have already experienced, and or based on your observation, the biggest barrier for scaling the nature and biodiversity finance, and then what kind of the most powerful financial instrument you have already think that will be very effective in Asia nature and biodiversity challenges are still missing? So what will be your feedback?
Thank you. So I think the challenge is, twofold. First, the size, as I think Rebecca has rightly pointed out. You would want a larger size. I'm from forestry science, so I always get this carbon question, like, we need this amount of forest for the carbon credit. And unfortunately, Taiwan, Japan is a little bit too small, while Australia, US is always their favorite. But as I put it in one of my slides, you want always the larger and things. The focus tends to be a little bit on the size. But I think we also need to go into the quality and the standard. And as we discussed, the biggest challenge here is how do we measure it? Reducing the uncertainty, we need the clarity. Evidence, I couldn't agree more. That's where I think the science can come in and say, okay, we come up with some kind of a measurable instruments and here and there. We have an Asian-specific challenge as well, because most of the standards, I would honestly say, are most Europe, US-led. So, for example, when they say forest, with a high nature value, they tend to think, okay, it's a pristine, untouched forest, while the artificial forests may have less evaluation. But I think that's where Australia, Japan, and Taiwan can maybe team up a little bit and say, if you do the forest management in longer term, even it's a human-made secondary nature, it could have a biodiversity positive impact. It may not be the nature forest that you would imagine in the US or maybe in other countries, part of the world. But I think that's so the size and the evidence would be the two things I think we need to think about. For 500 billion US is missing to reverse this trend. That's the figures we have at this conventional biological diversity. So that's the challenge. But I think we can reverse the trend by having a very smart and innovative way. So, of course, we can reverse the trends by changing some of the subsidies, some of the investments, but we can also reduce the curve that we have. Did you learn Kuznets curve in maybe at the university? There's a professor from Taiwan National University. If you don't know that, you can ask him. But it's if your economy grows, the burden grows as well, but it becomes less at a certain point. You can reduce that height by having more innovation or technology-friendly way. For example, the African continent are said to have bypassed the phone directly switching to no line to mobile phone. So they didn't use this cable line kind of phone. So that sort of reduce the resource intensity. Maybe, okay, cell phone uses rare metal and all that, but by having all kinds of these innovation, I'm very happy that there are many startups in the room and new companies coming in. So I think this amount, okay, 500 billion, that's a lot of money, but we can also think about innovation as well. Second point, if I may continue a little bit, regulators are not your foes. They're your friends. Or they're not always your friends, but they can actually accelerate the innovation. So we tend to think, okay, if we have more regulation, if we have more restriction, that's going to slow the economy. But what happened in the auto industry in Germany and in Japan, they had a limitation in the 80s that you have to clear this and that sort of had a modernization in the industry. So I think that could happen also in Taiwan, that regulations are not always bad, but also promotes certain innovations. For example, I mentioned these AI issues. Why do we have these data centers closer to the urban areas? Maybe Taiwan has a limitation in the lands, but there's other limitations that we use our, I don't know what you call it in Taiwan, but we have Suica, the card that you use to get into the transport, or you use your credit card all the time. And that has to happen within the milliseconds. So the data center cannot be very remote in the current technology. So I thought, at the beginning, I thought, why don't you have the data center in Okinawa or other areas that is easier maybe, and they don't have an earthquake there. But actually, these limitations and trade-offs, but I think that we need some kind of innovation, and regulations and all that kind of things can actually promote these kind of innovations. So I think that's something that we need to look at. Sorry for taking up time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then I would like to come to Sophia, because we always mention that the financial institution is not just only the money capital provider to a lot of the transition, innovation, or transformation. But now we also mentioned that the financial institution can become a very, very good partner, and we work together. You have the slogan, better together, right? So what does it mean in practical financial support to the business or industry for the future development?
Thank you. We learned the concept of partnership from engagement. When I studied, I learned the word engagement. I thought in Chinese it's like before marriage. So then I realized when we engage a corporate, that means we care about them, we share the insight, their problem is our problem, how we communicate and make sure they understand, then we become their knowledge, their power, and their action. So to me, financial institution is not just about money. We need to help them. We should also give them wisdom. We can help them with these actions. So if our borrowers and our investee companies, they have better capacity, their future is our future. So only if they are successful, our investment portfolio and loan book can be successful. So I found that very strange. This is an over-liquidity market. But very often, many good projects cannot find the money. First of all, many of them go to the wrong place. They are in early stage and they go to insurance for money. So the risk appetite, risk-reward expectation is so different. They need help. They need a translator help them to understand where am I and who you should meet. So capacity building, provide them transition finance, and how to boost the ecosystem that can show us where is the project. Because very often people ask us, where is the money? And then I'll ask them, where is a bankable, investable project? So if I dip deeper a little bit, our insurance, our asset management broker, and our bank, we try to look at the area where they need more help. And that's why we do a lot of projects. Besides engagement with large corporate, we also help SME to understand and help them to be more compliant to disclosure and to improve. And then we also offer quite a wide variety of transition finance. For example, if a company, they do improvement on their sustainability project, water usage, pollution, emissions, we offer them incentive. So a little bit of partnership that we can show them that we care. And lastly, as we are one of the largest financial group in Taiwan, can we do something more? So we are very happy to be early in many initiatives. Last year, we were honored to sponsor AVPN, where Everett is here, the main lead on climate. He will share his insight with us in this afternoon. They have a very meaningful project called Accent. Many projects in Asia, when we do energy transition, who will be affected? Can we think about orderly and just transition, care about local community, skill sets, micro and SME, how we can make some project workable and bankable, and then how can we scale up? So we are so happy that we are the initial, one of the anchor funder for them. And this year, they already get more sponsors. So we are so happy that we can be the booster or the ecosystem provider. So we're very honored to do that. So I think to conclude is that this is our mission to build the ecosystem. And only if our borrower, investee company, or our stakeholder, they are successful, can our financial portfolio, our operation can be sustainable.
Thank you very much. I think we are running out of the time, but I would like to ask my last question, but I would like to allow me to ask you just only to feedback 90 seconds for everyone, okay? And we know climate change is more and more pressing, but we know the climate change related to energy transformation, mobility transformation, building transformation, material transformation. Even now, we know AI development will also strongly related to climate issue, but nature and biodiversity. Very low awareness. The businesses still cannot find the relevance of why I have to get involved and where is the money for those kind of investment or project. So I would like to ask every panelist from the international regional investment group, and how about the follow-up and your core corresponding to the nature biodiversity and Japan situation. What is the next step? And then from the perspective of the policy and regulatory, how about the future demanding in nature biodiversity related disclosure? And then back to Cathay Financial Holding, you've done a pretty good job in the last couple of years. And then what will be the next? And 90 seconds. We don't want to make everyone too hungry, okay? So could I invite Rebecca, please?
I think for companies, I think the key is really to move towards integrated transition plans. So incorporating nature, climate, and social elements into the single resilient investment strategy. And so this helps ensure that climate solutions, renewable energy, critical minerals that needed to produce them, data centres, as we've heard about, don't create new nature risks or social instabilities. And so I think the companies that can get ahead and disclose and talk to investors about what their exposures are, then that will lead to better investment decisions and make it easier for investors. And then I would just say, you know, collaborate with your investors, and then work, and investors and policymakers and companies work together and increase that collaboration, because that will help us all move faster. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Professor?
So in Kumamoto, we're going to discuss the indicator, state of the nature, and possibly in fall this year, TNFD would take some certain decisions. So I think there are indicators and steps we're looking forward to. Keep your eyes open or ears perked up for what the scientific committees are also doing with the indicators and evidence in creating the common language, not only the regulators, but please listen to scientists as well. So that will be something that I look forward. And there are new, also promising technology coming up, like using your mobile phone and identifying certain species, and looking at the impact of climate change and so on. So I would like to stay also positive about, as an attitude, that we're not pessimistic, but we're getting there, but I think it's a bit of a way forward compared to climate change, but we're getting there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Vice Chair, please.
With regard to nature From a regulatory perspective, I would like to highlight the 3 key priorities moving forward. First one, although a moderator saying no disclosure no more, but I still want to mention disclosure. Actually, we believe the gradual and the practical approach to a nature-related disclosure is very important. And the second priority for regulator is ensuring that this disclosure leads to better decision. And the third one is strengthening data and the analytical infrastructure. So, because natural finance is still evolving rapidly, new instruments and nature-based solutions are emerging, but many are still at the early stage. Therefore, our approach is not one-size-fits-all. We will learn from international experience while working closely with industry to develop a solution that fit local conditions. Just as climate has become a core financial consideration, nature will increasingly become embedded in risk management, capital allocation, and long-term financial resilience. And back to Ria mentioned, financial authority and the regulator are not the enemy, not the foe, but the friend. I will mention our chairperson always mentioned that financial supervision is more like driving a car. And brake is very essential for safety. But the purpose of a car is moving forward. So we need an accelerate. So we are not only to balance the safety and the development, but we want to advance development and the supervision together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sophia, please.
Thank you. I really like to echo when first I met Rebecca talk about climate actions. We believe that climate and nature action is a project do by learning and learn by doing. And we, Cathay Financial Holdings, we spent 10 years building this platform called for cross-sector collaboration. And I really believe Asia can do a lot more, and we can do a lot more together. So as our logo, we can see we do together, and I believe we'll be better together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we really appreciate a very good insight from distinguished panelists. Now, everybody, I believe that every day we watch the FIFA, right? The football global competition. We always say one ball, two sides, but you can see now football become very colorful. So many sides, yeah? So back to the climate and nature biodiversity issues. It's a really a tough challenges for every one of us. I have been in this area for 30 years. I believe that every one of us have already devoted ourselves working on this area for quite a long time. But the fact is the global situation is still getting worse. Even we have already a lot of achievement, a lot of transformation has been already done, but that is a long journey. Now we have a more problem, nature biodiversity issue, and then inequality and social issue. So I think we are not enemy to each other. We are not something like the buyer and the supplier, not just only like the capital provider and you are a borrower. We are all part of the problems. We have to be all of part of the solution. So we need to work together very closely for our future, for our coming generation, for our money, for our profitability, for our country's competitive advantage. Remember one thing, when we want to pass over the accountability, responsibility to the next generation, you never say, yeah, we have been already so wonderful, so you can a little bit lazy. No, we always need generation by generation to work better, to contribute more, to become better. Then we are going to face a brighter future. Otherwise, when we getting old,
很多男生也遇到喜欢的女生啊，内心的第一个
right? Cheers up. Thank you very much for your attention and listening.
Thank you, Mr. Huang and all panelists for a wonderful session. I'd like to invite all our speakers to the center of the stage for a group picture to commemorate this wonderful discussion. 我们邀请贵宾们一起来到中央合影。我们是不是？好，我们先第一张，那稍后是不是也邀请副董事长加入？好，我们先看向前方第一张合影 ，Our first picture. 1, 2, 3. And next, please give us a thumb up. 我们第二张，请竖起拇指比个赞。好，我们现场来宾是不是再次掌声？感谢台上讲者们带来的精彩分享。我们这里也提醒现场的来宾，如果您是需要时数认列的贵宾，请记得要完成上午场次的签退，并且呢，我们接下来荧幕上将会显示一个 QR code，那